alumni guests who are joining us. And I have a colleague on the call, Mike Clark, and Mike is going to be the moderator for the panel. And I'm having a little technical difficulties here at home, so I'm going to be hanging in the background. But Mike, I will hand it over to you. Thanks for moderating.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Lisa. I'm Mike Clark, Associate Director of Alumni Engagement here at the Career Center. And I want to thank everybody for taking the time out of your busy schedules to join this panel, especially our three panelists, all St. Joe's alumni. I'm going to actually let them introduce themselves and tell you a little more about themselves. If you don't mind keeping questions to the end, we have a full agenda. And so if you don't mind at the end of the panel raising your hand and or submitting your question in the chat, we will be sure to get to that question towards the end of the discussion. Let me just go right here real quick to admit additional students, and then I will start the questioning. Okay, so this is for the panel. Tell us a little more about yourself and what influenced your decision to move to DC.
Guess I will go first. Well, I'm actually from here, so I had a good inclination to live at home after college. But I got into the commercial real estate industry, and so DC is probably one of the, next to New York City, depending on which kind of subgenre of commercial real estate you're in. This is the best place to be for it. But yeah, a little bit more about me. I was a business administration major back at St. Joe's, and I graduated back in 2019. But yeah, DC is probably, it's the second most place where kids move to after college next to New York. And our rent is cheaper, so there's a good selling point.
I love it. I'll go next. My name is Peter Smith. I am a class of 17 St. Joe's grad. I studied philosophy for my major and had Leo as my minor. Similar to George here, I was born in the DC area in Falls Church, right in Virginia. And basically, where I sit now is I work at this company called Fiscal Notes, which is a political advisory company. And of course, for anything in politics, you want to be in DC. But oftentimes, a lot of folks hone in on the stereotypes of DC, being it like a policy hub, and kind of that's it. DC has a ton to offer, food, a lot of great working young professionals starting their career and building upon it as well. So those were kind of the main factors that I took into play when considering either New York or DC, which were my two choices.
I will go next. My name's Cassie Fowler. I am a 2020 graduate of St. Joe's with my master's degree. So I went to Edinburgh University for undergrad and found myself at St. Joe's after taking a year off in between. So I studied crime analysis and intelligence through the graduate program, mostly online, but I lived in the Philadelphia area, right near St. Joe's campus, and I miss Hawk Hill all the time. But I was influenced to move to DC pretty much due to the pandemic. I had been working while getting my degree in Philadelphia, and then I lost, with the pandemic, my company shut down, and I was kind of in a spot where I was luckier than most people because I was getting my graduate degree. So I just took some time off and finished out my last couple months of my degree and started really applying for jobs. And I was applying all over. I'm from central Pennsylvania originally, so I was applying at Buffalo, Cleveland, Philadelphia. I wanted to stay in the area, but DC bit. I had never been to DC before August of 2020, and I moved in October of 2020. So now I'm here working with Forfeiture Support Associates, so FSA in short. I'm a senior pre-seizure specialist working at the asset forfeiture unit at the Kersine Morris building in Brentwood section of DC.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you. So, it seems like a lot of people, we're not from the DC area. And so how did you land your DC job, and kind of what resources did you use to find your current opportunity?
So I use a lot of social media websites. So I call them social media, but I guess job tools. I had been in the recruiting field prior to this, so I knew we found most of our clientele on LinkedIn and Monster. So I had accounts on LinkedIn, Indeed, Monster, ZipRecruiter, which is a little outdated, but I tried everywhere because I wanted to get a job. So LinkedIn ended up being my successful source, and USA Jobs. So referrals from those sites. And I think I ended up doing the application right through FSA website after going from LinkedIn and finding after the job posting. But those were the best tools. And I think even more user-friendly than going to job fairs and different things that are the classic ways to find occupations.
Yeah. My route was a little more different. You know, DC is a very relationship-based town, so I just started going through wormholes of, you know, asking questions of, you know, what kind of potential opportunities there would be for me after college. I ended up doing something I completely never thought I was going to be doing. I thought I was going to be a restaurant owner, but now I am underwriting multifamily mortgages for a little bank. I was at Capital One for 2 years prior to coming to where I'm at now, Alumni Capital. So how I got to Capital One was I actually heard about it through one of my cousin's friends who went to St. Joe's Prep. And then one of my friend's moms, you know, she worked there as well. So, you know, connections kind of bring you very, very far, farther than you think in your professional career. So the more questions you ask to people about employment and what kind of opportunities there could be for yourself, you'd be kind of shocked to see what could open for you. You know, there's nothing wrong with Cassie's done. You know, she was a workhorse when it came to finding a job online, but you know, I was getting on the phone and talk to people day in, day out through my whole senior year, from literally from August through June until I got my opportunity at Cap One. So yeah, you'll be surprised to see what opportunities you can get just by being confident getting on the phone with somebody. So
yeah, I completely agree there. That's essentially how I got my first job down in DC, was by flexing my network. And so one of my good friends from high school, we actually stayed in touch, and he actually referred me to his company that he was working at in DC, which got me the interview and a job. But the network doesn't just span through folks that you know directly. As both George and Kathy mentioned, LinkedIn is your friend. So even just prospecting out different positions or companies that might be interesting to you, sending someone a thoughtful note saying, hey, I'm thinking about applying to XYZ company. Do you have maybe 5 or 6 minutes to hop on the phone, or just ping me back to let me know, to talk about the culture, your responsibilities, your likes, your not likes. You know, I wouldn't be afraid to flex your network and step outside to even meet folks through LinkedIn as well, because again, as George mentioned, DC is a very relationship-driven city. And if you pigeonhole yourself to only folks that you know through school, through friendships, you might be blackholing yourself. So feel free to expand and shoot cold messages out to folks to learn more.
Yeah, great advice.
shoot your shot.
I'm sorry.
Oh, just shoot your shot. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, obviously network is an important part of the job search process. And George, you mentioned, we even Cassie and Peter about LinkedIn. And so if somebody is, you know, looking to network, you know, cold call, so to speak, like George mentioned, but as well as leverage other methods like LinkedIn, who would they connect with, and how would they kind of start that search? You know, some people start with alumni, you know, some people start with a local network, their family or friends. How did you start?
Well, I mean, clearly I started with, you know, family through friends and all that stuff. But what was kind of helpful for me when I was researching for work, you'll be shocked to see how big the St. Joe's Alumni Network is. If you guys say a particular field you want to work at, you know, or say a particular company, if you want to do Snapchat, you go on Snapchat, on LinkedIn, then you go to the employees and you do by first, second, or third connections. You are connected by a third way through St. Joe's, and you'll be shocked to see the amount of people that could be working at any company you could think of then with St. Joe's, and how non-reluctant they'll be to have a conversation with you. just say a quick little note about, oh, I bet you miss Hawk Hill or whatever, and then talk about Larry Steaks, and then next thing you know, you'll be in a phone call with them, and then you can get a recommendation for that XYZ company, and then hopefully get an interview. Then your job to take it from there on out. But starting with St. Joe's is pretty good, and then if you got family friends that can help you out, then obviously utilize that path.
Yeah, and I would just kind of double click on that point that George mentioned about just like building your network, and kind of the next step from that is building familiarity with these organizations. So whether it be having multiple conversations with different people in departments to get a sense of the culture and the organizational structure, that is super helpful to become like you're already kind of, it's making it seem like you're kind of already working there when you're interviewing, right? You understand the lay of the land, how things work over there, and a sense of the culture. In my exact case, I mentioned my friend referred me to this company he worked at in DC. I came down and stayed with him and went to a couple work happy hours with him, got to know a couple of the bosses and just other analysts on the ground, so that when I came onto the interview, I was speaking to exactly how their teams were structured, and that went a long way. So building upon that networking to not just be somebody that you ping back and forth on LinkedIn every now and again, but growing that and fostering it into a working relationship, right? People come and go in jobs, so that relationship can be more fruitful as time goes on. And again, it kind of just builds your network in general. So really double clicking on your relationships as you build through LinkedIn, but expanding upon it as well.
Thank you. It's, DC, George, you mentioned the cost, but in comparison to other cities like New York, it's much more affordable, but DC still is expensive amongst the other major cities in the country. And so how can somebody, what kind of advice can you give to others who are looking for housing in DC? Any neighborhoods you would recommend?
Yeah. I mean, luckily, I work in apartment buildings, and, where P is living is actually a very good neighborhood. Or Columbia Heights, that's pretty good. Where I'm living at right now, Adams Morgan, it's pretty affordable depending on where you look at. I mean, you can do the traditional route and move to Arlington, but when you're in Arlington, it's kind of like living in Hoboken. You're not really in the city, but you're pretty much adjacent to it. Where else? Yeah, and so my recommendation is, if you look in Columbia Heights, Adams Morgan, you can probably find some good place on U Street, Shaw area. Those places are a lot of fun. That's where the bars are and some concert halls. But my recommendation is that, if you're going to try to find a fun neighborhood to live at, you're going to have better luck finding cheaper rent if the building is older. When it's because compared to when it's newer, they're paying off, renovations and stuff, so the rent's gonna be a lot higher as compared to when you live in an older building. That or a townhouse, you can find like a basement unit or something like that and split with a friend. You could probably pay up to like $1,600 to $1,800 depending on where you live. But if you decide to live by yourself, you could be paying around like $2,000 or a little more than that. But that stuff increases if you have more roommates. And so what a lot of kids do is they move to the Shaw U Street area or Arlington and live with like 2 or 3 other people, and then your rent can actually be as low as $1,200, which could be really nice. And just living it up with your friends.
Yeah, and George, you're basically talking to my exact same living track that I had throughout DC. I initially moved to the Shaw area first, and I had 3 roommates. That brought rent down, and it was a very nice building, which was great. Then now where I live is Columbia Heights, and you can maybe see it in my archway right here, the pre-war archway. This is an older building, but again, to George's point, that gives you lower rent. My recommendation in general would just be to give yourself ample time to do research, because depending on the year that you are looking to start your lease, move in with folks, live by yourself, whatever, there are a lot of deals floating around in DC for real estate. So whether that be 1 to 3 months free rent, given the time of year, right? Summer is kind of tough for that because everyone's moving, but maybe in the winter, that would be attractive. I would just say give yourself ample time to explore the many options in neighborhoods, because there is so much out there. depending on the year, and also the different neighborhoods vary about their culture. George mentioned U Street and Shaw being more of the social hub, Columbia Heights more of the residential, townhouse / apartment building areas. Just try to get as much as you can a lay of the land as you do your research, and hopefully you have time to do that.
I think that in addition to all of that, it's really important to know yourself and look, kind of know what you want. If you are comfortable with having a longer commute, or if you're going to drive, or if you're going to take train, know that before you're really looking at housing. So I knew that I had never been to DC. I knew I had a car, but I didn't necessarily want to drive every day. I wanted to have the options. So I ended up in Wheaton, but I did look in DC. And what I did, and I think that I recommend this to anybody, I found where my job was on the metro system. So I'm right off of Rhode Island Avenue. So on the red line. So I went to every stop on the red line and calculated like how long the commute was for work. And I looked at apartments near every train stop. So I could essentially walk to the train, get on it, and get to work. Obviously, DC has really great metro system, so you don't have to necessarily be on the line that your job's on. But I just knew that, not being familiar, I needed something like that. And now I am still in Wheaton, so technically it's Maryland, but it's like a skip away from DC. I can be in DC within 20 minutes. And I recommend that. And I had a connection here, and I had asked like, hey, what neighborhoods do you suggest? And he didn't just tell me neighborhoods. He said, what do you want in your neighborhood? So like for me, being able to sustainably like walk to get groceries and be close to a gym, those were like my two most important aspects. Also like laundry. If I couldn't get it in my building, I wanted to be close to a laundromat. And so he gave me neighborhoods that he recommended based on that, compared to like if you want to be closer to bars, or if you want to be closer to museums or different things, like what you want to do socially, then base your living situation on that if you can. But there's definitely the resources here. You just the boys touch on the research, just kind of know, find out a little bit more about what you want, and then also the area that you're going to be in, and kind of make your decision on there. Don't try to give yourself enough time. I only had 2 weeks to find housing, and it was definitely I got a little lucky with COVID because there was deals going on where like they were begging people to move in. But obviously you can find the deals, you just have to know where to look for them.
Yeah.
Great advice.
And if you,
Sorry.
oh, well, I was just going to say, I didn't quite luck out with Metro. There is plenty of stops by my office, but there really isn't a stop in Athens, Morgan. So I invested in a electric scooter, and so now I take a 10-minute scoot down to Farragut North every 2 days a week when I go to the office, and to get to the grocery store, I take it to happy hour. It's pretty convenient, saves me some money actually, so it's pretty much a happy accident. So if you can't find Metro, there's actually a lot of kids who have cars in the city, predominantly in Arlington, and parking like a month in DC could probably run you about like $150 to $200 a month on top of your rent. But having a car is definitely beneficial depending on if your job is in Tysons, out in Virginia, but you live in Arlington or in DC, it's nice to have, but I-95 is not awesome.
It is not, but it's a very accessible city. George, you mentioned, like outside of the scooters or the cars or the metro, DC also has a pretty frequent presence of bike shares. So, if you have Lyft or the Capital Bike Share, which is the app, you just scan a bike, drop it off at any other location in the city, and it's like $1 to unlock it, 15 cents every minute or mile or something like that. So it's a small city relatively, and easy to get around whichever way you choose as well.
Yeah, and there's also that the scooter company Hellbiz. You can pay $40 a month and have unlimited rides. It's actually really nice. So
Cool. And so I agree 100%. Like knowing yourself and then, tailoring your search, your research based on who you are. My wife and I moved to DC in 14, lived on South Capitol Hill by Eastern Market for a few years. And
Mhm.
we had, like Cassie, we had about a month to find a place. And so it came back to the network, looping that network back in to learn more about what areas to live based on culture as well as metro. That's something you want to invest in, right? Or invest your time in, because you're driving or metro, it's amazing how much time it takes to get 3 miles, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so we sold our cars actually because of the cost of, overall cost of living in DC, and like parking, you had to pay for permits and you got to pay for parking at garages. And then me knowing me, if I'm running late, I'll park somewhere where I shouldn't be and I'll get a ticket. So all those costs, you got to factor in, right, in your decision. Because DC is a expensive place to live. But you do yourself, you do your research. I think like they all did, find your place in DC, right?
Yeah, and then one other thing
Yeah.
I would also highlight there as well is that with the different kind of commute options available, sometimes a lot of folks, especially now in the workforce, really lean into the remote work aspect of potentially moving to a new city. DC is actually leading the country as far as citizens proportionally working remote. So, whether you want to be in the office to, kickstart your career and kind of learn through osmosis like that, or ease into it through hybrid or fully remote, DC is a great city for that. Because again, we're very flexible in how the workforce operates, and we're leading the country in that facet. So it's a good thing to have, for sure.
That's a good point about.
Yeah, and
I'm sorry.
yeah, and like so I mean, to echo that, it's when you work from home, what me and my friends did when we all had to like find apartments, we all chose the same neighborhood. So we work from home and go hang out with each other during the day sometimes, for a walk in the park, and then we're a block away from the main ship here in Admo. So we just go to a open bar happy hour for $20, and then we forget about the workday. It's pretty nice.
Good. So what challenges did you initially face when you made the move to DC? Well, what are some of the classic rookie mistakes to avoid when moving to DC?
One of these is one that I love, and it's such a stereotype. It's hilarious, and probably everyone on the call from DC has heard of it. Like when meeting somebody new, whether it be like someone new at a bar, at a networking event, on a date, whatever, like your first like 3 questions shouldn't be, what do you do for work? Because a lot of times people fall into that trap of, oh, DC is so type A and very professional. That's how people build their personalities. People are totally done with that and kind of get annoyed once you ask that in your first like 3 or so questions to them. I fell into that trap when I first moved here of like, hey, my name is Peter. What's your name? Your name's George. What do you do for work? Like people fall into that trap in DC of like formulating their work personality and merging that into their personal personality. So like, don't be that guy or girl.
Yeah.
I think
Go ahead.
I think what I would tell anybody is, and it's so hard because you would think being fiscally responsible sounds so cliche. It makes me sound like probably your parents or my parents, but I came down here, started making, was probably my first like livable wage job outside of school, and it's easy to get stuck and get trapped into just wanting to do everything. So anytime you see an event, oh, I'm going to go there. Oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to this happy hour. And I think it's just being mindful of your money and where you're at. I highly recommend going out and being social, and this is a great city to do that. But when you first get here, it can be easy to fall into the trap of overspending, because I had lived in Philadelphia for 3 years. And before that, I had lived in Erie, so very cheap cities. And then DC was not so friendly. Those first few months I moved here. So I think being just equating yourself with what you're taking home and what you're willing to to spend each month on extracurricular activities, then you'll be in a better place than I was when I got here.
For mistakes moving in the city, I don't think I mean, you can mess up in a lot of ways because, you're fresh out of college and then you're in the new world right now. But honestly, God, I think moving to Arlington is probably one of your biggest mistakes because, you're not in DC. And, when you're out there in Virginia, you're subjected to, going out to like Spider Kelly's, Clarendon Ballroom, Wilson's Hardware, and the lot. And like, sure, those places are fun for like when you're fresh out of college because there's going to be other college kids that are your age that are there. Predominantly all of them went to Virginia Tech, JMU, UVA, or Penn State. A lot of state college kids there. And so they have never heard of St. Joe's before at all. So they're like, what's St. Joe's? And like, it's Hawk Hill, you don't know about it. But yeah, you don't get the full DC experience living in Virginia. You're kind of stuck out there. And we don't go to museums unless, we're bored on a Sunday and there's something cool that opened up. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. So getting around how to get to DC, kind of getting around DC. So do you have any advice? You did touch on Metro with the bikes and whatnot. Do you have any additional advice on kind of how to navigate DC or even a favorite part of living in DC since you've been in DC?
Yeah, I would say my favorite part of DC is, and this is going to sound like kind of weird, but the food, to be honest. Like the food options are top tier in DC. I think proportionally it has the most amount of Michelin star restaurants. I know that is number 3 in the country regardless of city size, but I think it's number 1 proportionally to population, which is really incredible. Yeah. Especially with Ethiopian food. DC has the number 1 amount of Ethiopian population in the United States. So if you haven't had that should be your first stop in DC. It's incredible. But really, like whatever type of cuisine you're looking for, DC has like some of the best in the country. So I would say that.
Yeah, like we don't really have, a cuisine that's technically very DC because we're a very transient city and people just come and go. And all people from all over the world come here to work and, they leave. So, we have some of the best meal pots and pizza, I think, around. It's better than Vetri Pizza. I can tell you that for a fact. Yeah, and I'm a big food dude. Like, there's a bunch of food halls opening it up, and you'll just be shocked to like walk around and somehow see this little hole in the wall, and they have like $6 Aperol spritzes and like $4 arancinis, and you can find your deals. But yeah, and Gordon Ramsay just opened up a Hell's Kitchen here. And then Jose Andreas, he has a bunch of restaurants here. This is where his home base is. And Steven Starr, who's the guy who owns Elvez in Philly, he owns all those restaurants. He's starting to open up more restaurants down here. So like I was saying before, how like New York, we're second in New York. New York has kind of been had in every restaurateur and business opportunities now being done here in DC because there's way more development going on, even though we're the 4th most expensive city in the country and I think the 3rd most populated.
Yeah. Interesting. So what are some, so you touched on some inexpensive, or were they some of your inexpensive activities? Like what other fun activities could they try in DC?
Yeah, I mean, museums are free. And then we have the Capitol Crescent Trail. You can get a Capitol bike. If you ride for like a half hour, it's like $8, but you can go pretty far with them because some of them have motors on it. And so the Capitol Crescent Trail, I recommend starting in Georgetown. It literally wraps around the whole southern part of DC along the Potomac River. So you're going to be biking by all the monuments, and then it's really nice doing a Cherry Blossom Festival as well. You get like a blanket out, a speaker, and some beers, and great afternoon. There's a ton of free stuff to do. And then there's just events that go on all the time. Like here in Adams Morgan, there's this thing called Porch Fest. They have 18 different live music venues, all local bands, and they're playing on people's front porches. And you can not free when you have to go grab your beer, but walk around the streets with beer in your hand. Open container laws are open that day. It's be fun.
I agree. The city's really good for anybody that is into like outdoor activities. Right now, and I don't know how long it'll stay, so don't I hope I hope it stays the same. But right now, the weekend pricing for a metro anywhere you go is $2. So even if you start, like I start up in Wheaton, but this weekend we had an alumni event at down at the World War II Memorial. So I took 2 different trains, got there within like 40 minutes though, but it was still just $2 because I didn't get out of the station or anything. And I just did the transfers. And then on a beautiful day, just that Capitol Walk, I think in the earlier parts of spring, you'll have the cherry blossoms, you'll have tulips. We have the US Botanical Gardens down here near the Capitol, and it's just a beautiful walk. And there's all different trails. The name is escaping me, but there's one that comes up here through Brentwood too, that goes all the way up to like Tacoma Park and Silver Spring. So if you're like the outdoors and that's more your vibe, then the bars and the nightlife, then you can, it's here and it's free. And it's nice change than sitting in front of a computer screen all day.
Totally. And then one other thing to add to the list here is obviously DC, being the city that it is, has a ton of embassies. And oftentimes these embassies open up their doors to have events, showing off their home culture and overall just kind of a networking event. Those happen annually. And again, it's open door. So whenever that happens, it's a big, people dress up, go on an embassy kind of, I don't know what you would call it, but like they go to all the embassies and, explore the cuisine, have a couple drinks, meet people, network. But that's a really cool event that shouldn't be forgot about. Also, DC stereotype is that it's just the monuments and like nothing past that, no greenery, but Rock Creek Park is a great park that is very accessible. And if you go there, it's not hiking, but it's a good break from the hustle and bustle of the city to get some good vitamin D and your steps in. So there's greenery out there. You've got to go to them.
Hey, Mike, it's Lisa. Sorry to interrupt. We have a couple of questions in the chat that are a little, we're talking a lot about the area and all of that, but I wanted to address these before, if that's okay with you.
Mhm.
All good. So one of them is, I'm sure you can all see them, but kind of getting back to that networking, which I really appreciate you all sharing that. It's a lot more genuine coming from you than us sort of instructing students on how to genuine, but to hear you repeat the exact same things we sort of promote is really reassuring to me and hopefully to all the students. So someone asked, is it true that getting a job without a referral, AKA networking, is impossible, or is it possible? I know you all shared your experiences, but what are your thoughts on that?
I would say it's definitely possible, but I would say you'll have better luck depending on which industry you're looking at, right? So oftentimes, and George, this is kind of your lane, but in real estate, it's more of a relationship-driven business. So you'd want to know somebody in that office before applying. Whereas in tech, depending on the organization, you have a better shot, I would imagine. So I think it's kind of a bad answer, but it kind of depends. But it's definitely possible to get a job without a referral. I would just double click that you should have relevant experience. Mm-hmm. Granted that they're entry-level jobs. That's always, especially these days, kind of has an asterisk to it. So you want to have some experience at least, but it's definitely possible. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. It's possible, but not impossible, I think, depending on, the field, like Pete said, I have a networking company. So obviously it's all about who you know. Politics, I think you can get in easierly than not having a connection, because I know people who just sent some resumes and, became, I know this one girl who somehow her resume got to the top of the list, and now she's Mark Shapiro's scheduler. So you can get on the hill, I think, easily without a connection base. But for tech, I don't think I could really opine on tech as much, but prior to my job at Cap One, I was a sales rep for a tech startup company. And if that's that's a much easier avenue to get into the tech world, is becoming a sales rep for these companies, being SDR, because there's a lot of turnover with them. So I mean, that job was definitely a lot easier than getting my job at Cap One, but it's just, yeah, sales for a tech company, I think you can definitely get in without a connection. So, but if you're trying to get into a job that you think you might need a connection to it, just do what we said before and go on LinkedIn. Give someone a very short message, about a sentence or two, like who you are and why you want to work at this company, and just request a time to talk to them. It's a lot better being more suggestive about talking, like, hey, can you talk today at 2, rather than like, can you please give me some time out of your day? You gotta be a little more confident in yourself for that. So yeah, go on LinkedIn and try to schmooze somebody to have a conversation, and then they could probably give you a referral like we suggested before. So, the real life, you gotta put yourself in on a high pedestal if you want to be there one day. So
yeah, and then one other thing that I would also open up, and I'm sure the other hosts would agree the same, is that feel free to shoot myself a request on LinkedIn if you'd like to discuss anything in DC further. As I mentioned before, especially in the policy world, that would be, it's as helpful as you can get to have somebody on the ground there. And I work at a political advisory organization called Fiscal Notes, and we actually also own CQ, Congressional Quarterly, if anyone on the line knows that. So we're fairly in tune with that. So I would just say, feel free to shoot me a connection and we can discuss anything further if you're curious.
Amazing. Thank you for those answers. A couple of questions are about, potential internship opportunities that you know of. Maybe that's something, that you could communicate with independently, if you know of any, or, suggest any. And then another question is about IT and tech jobs in DC. Do you see a lot of those? I mean, those of us that aren't in the area, of course, always think politics, but I'm sure there's a variety. So if someone could speak on that, I'd appreciate it.
So as far as opportunities in IT and tech, I think DC is a great city for it. I used to be that California was like everybody's dream, I feel like, for IT and tech in Silicon Valley, but with the mass exodus out of San Francisco, I think DC is seeing a bigger increase. Every company, and I'm talking, I work for federal law enforcement, so I'm specifically with the postal inspectors. So we are so far behind on technology, and we are actively trying to get into the more of the technical world. So a few of my coworkers, when I first got here, left for IT jobs. They were in more of like the cybersecurity path, but some of them went to the Pentagon. You would be surprised where every aspect. So whether you're working at a sales job, or you're working in federal law enforcement, or you're working in, policy, like everybody is using technology. So the IT and tech jobs are on the up and coming. Again, you just have to know what sources to look at. And I think the IT and tech industry has a great networking through social media, and from jobs that are basic, from like web developers to graphic designers, all the way down to just basic like modem care. So I think that if you're looking for IT and tech, DC would definitely be a great city to look in, especially if you want to stay on the East Coast.
Yeah, completely agree. And there's a handful of companies that are always hiring, even in kind of tough times like this. A couple just popped into my mind. Amazon, right? They just opened their HQ2 down here in Virginia. They have an interesting split of their hiring. A lot of it, I think it was like 75% right now, is more so in the business roles. But of course, a company like Amazon, AWS, they'll always be hiring on the IT side of things as well. So I would say Amazon. Booz Allen Hamilton is another consulting firm that has a very robust IT function that I'm sure they're hiring as well. Definitely Deloitte. That was my last one there, George, for sure. Yep. Deloitte. That's a DC staple. And again, like they're a beast and have many different functions. So, you know, if you don't find any open roles in one part of their business, like federal consulting, their IT side of that, you could always pop over to, you know, their other like global IT functions as well. So it's a beast. So like, again, Amazon or AWS, Booz Allen Hamilton, and Deloitte are 3 big ones that I would start with for IT.
So
Yeah,
talk about-
Pete,
I'm sorry.
Pete nipped it on the bud right there. And if you're not looking for, you know, big company type of stuff, ton of startups in Tyson's. Tyson's is becoming very tech oriented. And I know there's a ton of cybersecurity offices opening up in DC too. Like there's this guy who sells office space and that comes to my events. Can't imagine he's selling too much office space now, but there's a ton of cybersecurity offices that are opening up. So I think if you want to go the more startup route, just Google tech startup in Tyson's Corner, Virginia.
So talking about tech industry, like specifically in the DC area, you know, Pete made an interesting point about, you know, how things have changed since COVID, you know, being able to work remotely. And have you seen, you know, the Amazon AWS is kind of offer more remote work? You know, is it more hybrid? Is it more full-time remote? And could that give somebody who, you know, is still kind of doing some research on where they can live in DC and building a network, could they actually work from Philadelphia, from their hometown remotely for those positions, and then have more time to, if they want to relocate DC, do that later in the future? If that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, more people are starting to have permanently remote jobs. And you know, surprisingly, it's kids who are graduating college now that are demanding, you know, they never want to go in the office. I will say though, from a lot of people who are trying to employ college kids, they are willing, they're going to take the kid who says, I want to be in the office more than the kid who says, I want to be at home. You actually learn way more in person, and you make better relationships and you become better at your job when you're in person in the office compared to being at your home on your computer. I hate to say that's the reality of it, but you know, that's how I started out, and that's how I learned how much I did when I, you know, and it brought me to the point where I am today. So if you say I'm going to go in the office, they will like you. So say that.
Yeah, I totally agree with what George was saying, for sure. And then just, you know, to your previous point there, Michael, about the flexibility options for someone freshly moving to DC potentially, that could be an interesting buffer period, especially given the price point for cost of living here. To, you know, get that DC job, maybe if it's remote, you know, put a couple paychecks in your pocket, then put down a down payment for an apartment, then move. That's always a good move. One that I wish that I had the flexibility to do when I first started, to be clear. But then, you know, going forward, George makes a great point. Being able to show your worth physically in an office, being seen by the C-suite or just upper management in general is always a great way to make yourself stand out. So when they see your performance on paper, it's not just, you know, Peter or George or Cassie or Michael on paper performing, but you physically know them, and it kind of makes your presence a little more underlined in your performance. So another cool thing is that, again, DC is very flexible in remote work. So it's not just good for a good start to, you know, monetarily have some backing, but just an example of that is over the summer, I traveled to Puerto Rico, and the company that I work with, our headquarters is in DC, but I actually was there for about 2 weeks and worked from Puerto Rico for 2 weeks, which is super cool. So you do have that flexibility to do cool things like that if you do get a cool job. And DC is like by far the most flexible city for employees for remote work as well.
Oh, yeah. So, my coworker got married in Korea and worked in Korea for 2 months.
I'm sure that was a fun time.
You can work anywhere you want. Oh yeah. Yeah, 2 a.m. calls are not awesome for him. So.
Right.
Lisa, I'm sorry, whoever asked that question. I know that was a really long-winded response, but a lot of good information.
No, all good. I think that addressed it, and I appreciate Pete, you know, offering to connect on LinkedIn, because I feel like students then can you know, reach out independently, you know, if they have more specific questions. So thank you for that offer.
Of course.
Lisa, was there a few more questions, or was that the last question as of right now?
Yeah, I think that was basically it. Just the question about the internships, which was pretty broad. So I feel like there are, you know, we know about the Washington Center as a potential internship for students. And I'm sure there's a lot of other ones, but if any of the three of you have specifics, either with your organizations or, you know, have firsthand knowledge of opportunities, certainly feel free to jump in, but no pressure, because I know that's a big question.
Yeah. My company takes interns every summer. So in the New York and Columbus office, unfortunately. So, but that can give you an opportunity to live up in New York. And if you want to live in Columbus, then all power to you. But there's also a guy who owns buildings that comes to my events, and he says he's looking for interns for the summer as well. He's on the equity side, so he buys buildings, and as for me, we do the debt, which is the loans, you know, the mortgages for the guy. I give him the mortgages and so on and so forth. So
I mean, we have about 2 more minutes. And so any last minute questions for the panel?
you want to talk about fun stuff, concerts, bars?
Like Pete said, connect with them on LinkedIn. I found everybody on LinkedIn. We connected. This is what kind of came out of that. I think some additional great things in the future will come out of this as well. It just, you know, take the initiative to follow up with them, connect with them on LinkedIn, and or email me or put my email in the chat. Email me. I'm more than open brokering an email introduction to any of the panelists today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And whether it's whether it's a quick, like, you know, chat on LinkedIn, or just an email, or a quick 5, 10, 30 minute, whatever you like, call to kind of talk through where you're at in looking at internships or full-time jobs, or just kind of talk to our path at SJU towards working full-time. Like, I don't want to speak for everyone else here, but I'm an open book. I'm happy to discuss further and like suggest things that worked, to not recreate the wheel too much. So feel free.
Yeah.
I'll
I also
just-
threw in
go
my
ahead, George.
I threw in my personal phone number. Just shoot me a text if you want to talk about DC or any opportunities. Like I said, I have a networking company. If you want to do commercial real estate or you're interested in hearing about it all, it's great. My life has really changed from where I was initially. So, and I couldn't be happier. I have a sick apartment and a dope life. So, but yeah, also personal email is in there as well. So, yeah, do not be shy at all. And yeah, maybe I can help you get a job. So
Thank you, George.
Yeah, amazing.
Right.
I just have to chime in one more time on the networking. Thank you so much, George. I mean, I tell students this literally every day, all day, like, please reach out. It's a small, you know, relatively small community, like you said, with the St. Joe's Network. We all like to help each other. We're you know, we're connected in that way. And hearing it really from sincerely from the three of you is just so, it's powerful. So I really appreciate your generosity and your time, you know, and sharing your words of wisdom.
Absolutely. And think about it like corporate speed dating, right? You'll find the one. You just got to go through the reins.
Keep shooting your shot. Yep.
So I guess that's a wrap. Well, thank you, everybody, for your time. I know, George, you got a meeting here at 11. Thank you so much for your time, Cassie, Peter, and Lisa. Thank you all for your time and energy today.
Absolutely.
Thank you
Thank
all.
really
Have
for
a
the
great
attention.
day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All good, Mike. Great job.